This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Quality sleep is essential. That's why the Sleep Number Smart Bed is designed for your ever-evolving sleep needs. Need a bed that's firmer or softer on either side? Helps you sleep at a comfortable temperature? Sleep Number Smart Beds let you individualize your comfort so you sleep better together. J.D. Power ranks Sleep Number number 1 in customer satisfaction with mattresses purchased in-store. And now, during our lowest prices of the season, shop the Sleep Number Smart Bed starting at $999 for a limited time. Prices higher in Alaska and Hawaii. For J.D. Power 2023 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Nina, hello.
Hello, Sheila. How are you?
Yes. Food safety tasting.
Yes.
What food is safe? Well, for this week's food programme, we are in my kitchen, in my house in North London, and I'm with producer Nina Pullman, and we're sitting at a table with several platters of what at first seems like an odd selection of food, but it's not actually, it's not a random selection, Nina, is it?
No, it's not random at all. So in front of us, we've got some bean sprouts, we've got some rocket leaves, washed and ready to eat. We've got some flaked almonds, we've got some chorizo, we've got 2 uncooked burgers, we've got a selection of cheeses, we've got 3 unpasteurised raw milk cheeses, and we've got 1 pasteurised, and we've got a well-known chocolate bar. All of these foods at some point in the last 2 to 10 years have been identified as the source of a food-borne illness. So think listeria, E. coli, salmonella, those types of things. So this isn't a food scare story, despite appearances. We're not out to put you off your dinner. But we have been tracking a particular food safety story this year that was eventually linked to a raw milk cheese. And raw milk and food safety are both things that you've covered on the food programme, Sheila, many times over the years, haven't you? So what was your interest in this particular story?
Well, it was the outbreak over Christmas, linked apparently to a raw milk cheesemaker. And as we have done stories from that cheesemaker in the past, and I know what remarkable high standards go into the production, I was pretty taken, what on earth was going on here. We're not actually going to name that cheese because the case is concluded, the cheese is safe, and it's the family of the cheesemaker have had a really, really hard time. So, together we came up with this, we asked this question: what makes food safe? How are food producers coping with these new strains of food pathogens? And what does safe food mean in a world where food, industrial food, ultra-processed food, is increasingly seen as a serious cause of ill health? But we'll talk about that later.
BBC News at 6 o'clock. The UK Health Security Agency is trying to find the ultimate source of a widespread outbreak of E. coli. So far, more than
midway through recording this programme, there was a nationwide outbreak of STEC 0145, that same strain that got us interested in making this programme in the first place.
Good evening. The food company Greencore, which supplies most major supermarkets, is recalling some sandwiches and salads as a precaution in light of recent E. coli reports. We're going to have the latest on that.
Going back a week, we first had word of this series of cases of a strain of the E. coli bacteria described as clinically serious and known as STEC. Well, today we've learnt from the UK Health Security Agency that 211 people had been affected.
BBC News, it's 3 minutes.
The fear of being linked to an outbreak is already seriously affecting what cheese is being made. I've seen this before in the cheese wars of the 90s and early 2000s, documented in many editions of the food programme. Are we back in the wars? But this time with new evidence of toxic microbes, Shiga toxin E. coli. Or is it all just due to better testing? Well, Nina went to get a top cheese view on this at Neal's Yard Dairy, the cheesemongers, maturers and exporters in London.
This one right here was made on the 26th of April.
So we're in this room with, how many cheeses have we got here, Bronwyn?
Let's have a look. 7 different kinds of cheese on racks. And just, thinking back during my time working with these cheesemakers, this one right here used to be raw, but has recently decided to pasteurize over concerns about the risk of STEC. Here's another cheese that, again, was originally raw milk, but is now pasteurized. This one is still a raw soft cheese, but is actively thinking about having to find a different milk source because her milk supplier is concerned about the risk. This cheese over in the corner used to be made from raw milk from the producer's own herd, but they got worried about microbiological risks and decided to pasteurize. And this other one right here is the only remaining raw milk cheese that I know is not actively having this discussion. This is absolutely making waves in the industry, and I think the point is not that these cheeses are massively risky. We have sold these cheeses in their raw milk form for years and years and years and never had any issues with any of these cheeses, and yet all of the producers are either actively have decided to pasteurize or are considering it right now, and that's very concerning.
That was Bronwyn Percival of Neal's Yard Dairy. We'll hear more from her later. To understand more about this worrying newish bug, we talked to Britain's leading expert on E. coli, microbiologist Professor Hugh Pennington.
E. coli is a bug that we all have in our intestines, and the vast majority of the E. coli variants, there are hundreds of different variants, are quite harmless unless they get into the wrong place. In the 1980s, a new kind of E. coli appeared, which now we call STEC. STEC is short for Shiga toxin E. coli. And this is an E. coli that's got a toxin, a poison. This particular kind of E. coli used to be called the burger bug in America because it was associated with people eating rare burgers. The bug actually lives in cattle as a normal inhabitant of the cattle intestines, doesn't cause any disease. The farmer doesn't know his cows have it. It's also in sheep and goats and deer, but ruminant animals. And it only causes mischief in people when we basically eat some of the manure from those cows that has the bug in it. Now, we don't go out eating manure, but of course, manure can get onto food, it can get onto surfaces. It has the very, very unusual property for most bugs of being very infectious in very small numbers. It's not just falling ill, but some people, a minority, get serious complications. It's nastiest in young children under 5, and it can also be very nasty in the elderly.
We've talked about meat and cheese. What other foods can be carriers of STECs?
Well, any food that can get manure on it, let's put it like that. Vegetables have been a source because the field might have been treated with manure. For example, in America, they had big outbreaks with apple juice because the apples had fallen to the ground in an orchard where animals had been running about. You can still get contamination after the pasteurization if the pasteurizer isn't working terribly well. So it's not always as simple as saying pasteurizing products are safe.
Microbiologist Professor Hugh Pennington. So why are we seeing newer strains of E. coli? Are we simply testing more and therefore finding more? Well, the World Health Organization points to a link between the increase and the overuse of antibiotics to treat human disease, but also their use in keeping farm animals alive and disease-free when they're reared intensively. That's led, it seems, to the very dangerous spread of antibiotic resistance. That was a theory put to the test when the EU banned antibiotics in animal feed in 2006, and the cases of 0157 E. coli generally began to fall in the UK. Other factors in the growing strength of STECs might also be linked to what farm animals are fed. Animals fed on grains seem to have more toxic STECs in their guts than animals reared on pastures.
I mean, there are a few papers on this. Is the intensification and perhaps switching through to grain-like diets has made a difference in terms of increased numbers of these types of organisms?
I feel like we're at a very fragile moment, and we need to be very careful that in the pursuit of eliminating all risk, we could actually eliminate our cultural heritage and these delicious and flavorful foods.
Well, the reality is many more outbreaks are traced to products produced in that industrialized food system. What's happening to our climate across the globe? The flooding events that are moving pathogens from places where they wouldn't normally move if there wasn't flooding. And so I think it's something everyone should be paying attention to.
You've got this sort of understanding of how we need exposure to things, we need this variation in our diets.
We've got to recognize that this is a real risk.
3 microbiologists and the technical director of Neal's Yard Dairy, Bronwyn Percival, on the various drivers of STEC infections. We'll get back to them in a few minutes. But first, back to our question. What is safe food? What does the question mean to most people? Is it sterile, bug-free, super clean food? Or is it something more long-term? To find out, I joined a session run by the Food Conversation, a countrywide gathering of views on food and agriculture, coordinated by the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. They're focusing on 5 specific areas of food and farming. Safety isn't one of them, but I took my chance to throw a question into the mix.
I'm Natalie, I'm currently living in Sheffield and I'm a civil servant. Safe food to me means that the food that I'm eating is not going to cause me any detrimental effects, either short term or long term. But I can enjoy it safely and know that it's doing me some good.
Hi, I'm Sophie. I'm from Manchester. I'm a project manager and I work in local transport. Safe food means to me that what I'm eating isn't going to negatively impact my health or well-being. Food safety should really take in consideration my short-term and long-term health and my physical health, but also mental and well-being as well.
2 food citizens taking part in a national conversation about food. But what about food producers? For them, food safety is part of the everyday. Producer Nina Pullman went to a panel on the future of British cheese to find out what the industry is talking about.
Right, so welcome everyone. We're going to start off with an actual cheese tasting. So that's why
Before the panel got going, we all tasted some of the UK's best-known farmhouse cheeses.
Kirkham's Lancashire. This is the pale triangular cheese. It's actually at the top of your plate. So Graham Kirkham makes it. I was saying it's a bit like a giant panda of the cheese world because he is actually unique and endangered. The next one next to your Kirkhams is Havant cheddar, so that's much more yellow.
Afterwards, I stole a few minutes in the quiet with cheesemaker Mary Quick and food writer Jenny Linford.
Hi, I'm Mary Quick. I'm a farmer and cheesemaker, and we're at the amazing London Cookery School.
Hi, I'm Jenny Linford. I'm a food writer and a cheese lover.
Thinking about food safety and starting with you, Mary, perhaps, could you just explain, maybe from a human perspective, as a cheesemaker, how important food safety is to you?
Actually, in the main, cheese is an incredibly safe product because the whole deal with cheese, whether it's from raw milk or pasteurised milk, is it's a preservation method. And so in the main, what you're doing is taking out all of those risk factors. And that's what we spend really an enormous amount of our brain space as cheesemakers, is thinking about making sure the product is safe. And it's also true that there's no way that you can remove risk totally.
People might be quite surprised to know that as a cheesemaker you have to have that kind of interaction with science on that level.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, being a farmer and a cheesemaker, actually what we are is very applied scientists. We need to know the science. Ignorance is no justification for anything at all.
And for you, Jenny, what's your kind of perspective on this issue and how it can really affect small businesses?
Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking, when you hear a story in the news or someone you know is facing an issue with their cheese, there's contamination or they're suspected of contamination. And I think it's very brutal. But it's obviously very serious. People's health is serious. But it's a long, slow process of investigation, which can be financially absolutely catastrophic, really. I think one of the things that when I first started writing about food, which is over 30 years ago, there were a fair number of raw milk cheeses. And actually, I think that's they're going down. I think that there is definitely a pressure to pasteurise.
Why do you feel that it matters?
It matters because people then can get to choose. I choose this food. I choose to support these producers. That gives a sense of, I think, empowerment to consumers. Consumers are actually the most powerful force on the planet. If we're left to the food industry that big food would like to give us, we would end up with incredibly boring food choices that probably would make us quite ill over time. Food is really where the rubber meets the road in terms of, how the planet works. Soils and air and water and transport, the way it moves around. Also, it's about fun. It's about joy and pleasure.
We've been talking about, food that makes you sick. It's not just fresh food. What about the growing problem that we have from food that makes you sick in other ways, like the kind of ill health, dietary ill health?
The whole interest in the gut and the gut microbiome is coming, and because raw milk is rich in microbes, it's seen as a good food, and raw milk cheese is specifically highlighted by people who are, like Tim Spector, who are talking about gut health, will mention raw milk cheese as a food that is good for your gut.
We spend an awful lot of time reassuring people that the thing that we have been doing, our little industry has been doing for millennia, is actually safe. I think you're much more likely to die from the impact of overeating and poor food than you are from eating exquisite artisan cheese. Well done, Mary.
Thank you so much. Okay. So that was Mary Quick, who makes a remarkable pasteurised cheddar cheese, unlike the one we have on the table here, which is unpasteurised. And she's also, incredibly, a 14th generation cheesemaker. And then we also heard there from Jenny Linford, who is a food writer. So STECs and E. coli have actually been studied by microbiologists for years, including by Professor David Galley, who is the chair of microbial genetics at the Roslin Institute at the University of Edinburgh. I gave him a call to see what had changed in this area during his career, and also what solutions his lab have been looking at.
Well, I've been working on E. coli infections, particularly sugar-toxigenic E. coli, since 2000. So I've had 25 years of research in that space. Transformative in that time has been genomics, I suppose, the sequencing of bacteria. You're dealing with a very accurate fingerprint of what an organism is. It really is now very possible to say, yes, these are all part of the same outbreak. I think there's always caution about over-sampling of products. And we have the potential to deep sequence everything now, right? And understand in great detail what's there. That's expensive. I think there's still a lot of ordinary routine microbiology done. We really only move to the genomics when we're investigating important outbreaks where there are serious infections and potential deaths.
In terms of the products that can be linked to contamination?
So initially, a lot of the L157 infections were all associated with undercooked meat. But then we have seen in increasing number of infections through raw produce, particularly salads, things like unpasteurized fruit juices, and unpasteurized milk products. There are also outbreaks for people literally going out camping and getting exposure to sheep or cattle feces. Water outbreaks as well, especially private water supplies, where you might get runoff from fields that end up in the water and then it's not sterilized properly. So there's this kind of haunting, very low-level risk that exists.
In terms of the differences between cheese and milk, is there a different risk profile between those two products?
Absolutely. One of the wonders of cheese, obviously, is that it matures, especially some of the sort of harder and more mature cheeses. They dry out in the process. Many have salt added as well. So as you have less water in your product and you have increased salt, you generally kill off microbes like E. coli. So certainly the harder, drier cheeses are of a much lower risk, and that's always been kind of known. However, some of the softer cheeses, it's harder for that process to kill. So you've really got to manage, what are the steps in that process that can enable the microbial load to fall.
Could you talk me through some of the future solutions?
In my opinion, and there are a few papers on this, is the intensification and perhaps switching through to grain-like diets has made a difference in terms of increased numbers of these types of organisms. So that's an overall issue for world kind of food production. And so there is potential interventions there in terms of switching things back to more pasture, lower intensification. Then we've got more direct interventions in terms of vaccines. It works in small-scale studies, but when we went through to a larger feedlot in the US, what we found was it was really too short a term of the resistance. I've moved my whole group over to phage-based interventions. These are viruses that infect bacteria and kill them. So we can find viruses, these phages, that kill E. coli 157 and other serotypes. So that's really exciting. What we now are testing is whether we can get them to work by adding these in the feed or in the water to the animals. There are already bacteriophage that are used in packaging. I think it's for leafy greens and things in the States. And I think there may be even some sprays on carcasses as well.
Would it ever be available for sort of small-scale producers as an extra layer of defence?
That's absolutely the plan. It can be very cheap to produce. It could be added into each milk batch because it's very specific. That's the beauty of it. You're only killing your target bacteria here. So you can leave the ones that are more interest for the cheese-making process alone.
Do you think there's a risk that something like this is going to allow quite an intensive system to become safer, but perhaps pushing the problem down the line?
We have intensive food systems because we have a lot of people to feed. It's something that I would like to see looked at, reducing the intensification, but I'm in a privileged position of being able to go out and pay X or Y for my food. And I know that's been some of the debates you've had in the food programme, and it's a really, really key area. When you meet victims, I suppose it's the right phrase, people have had that infection and are permanently affected for the rest of their lives or have died. I mean, if if there is a solution to bring that way down, it's got to be a great thing to do. And that's what I've spent my kind of research career trying to do. We're not there yet, but I hope we're beginning to reduce the burden through understanding the organism.
So that was David Galley, microbial geneticist, with his biological warfare approach to tackling this bacteria. But the impact of STECs is actually already being felt outside of the lab in real-world food scenarios, not only through outbreaks, which are in fact extremely rare, but for those producers who have to keep pace with these changes in scientific testing and in the knowledge, all while making their product. Let's go back to Bronwyn Percival at Neal's Yard Dairy's maturing rooms under the railway arches in Bermondsey, South London.
I'm the technical director for Neal's Yard Dairy, and I'm also the chair of the Specialist Cheesemakers Association Technical Committee. So that's the industry body that represents small and medium-sized artisan cheesemakers.
I can see a few cheeses through that glass window. I feel like a lot of people would be fascinated to see where this place is. It's very atmospheric to be under a railway arch, but we are getting the real sound effects here.
The full picture, the full soundscape.
Could you kind of summarise what types of protections and precautions a farmhouse cheesemaker would typically have in place?
When we have a picture of a farmhouse cheesemaker in our minds, sometimes we might be thinking of somebody who's dressed in their farm gear, leaning over a vat, in a room that's anything but sanitary. And it's so funny because it couldn't be more opposite from the truth. Farmhouse cheesemakers, artisan cheesemakers, and particularly raw milk cheesemakers are some of the most paranoid people on the planet. And that's because people care desperately. We know as an industry that food safety is fundamental. It's interesting to me as well because We know that many of these food safety issues, like STEC, for example, are not just a cheese issue. In fact, it's not even primarily a cheese issue. This is a fresh vegetable issue. This is a salad issue. This is a rare burger issue. This is an issue that's been associated with things like nut butters and dried fruit and all, things that we would consider entirely normative and part of a normal diet. But there's something about the fact that this can also be a raw dairy product issue. Unlike all those other foods, which everybody eats every day, raw milk cheese is considered really, really risky. Particularly regulators, but even the producers themselves have in the back of their mind that this is a risky product. We're jumping through so many extra hoops that I fear that we're actually creating a selective environment that's making it unsustainable to be a raw milk cheese producer.
Why do you think there is this perceived extra risk around raw milk and raw milk cheese?
I think it goes back to the idea of what's normative. Salad, which we all think of as very healthy, is potentially dangerous. The way that a consumer or a regulator is going to interact with that information is completely different than if you say to them, a raw milk cheese is potentially dangerous. One is something that everybody in the UK probably eats on a daily basis. Another one is something that operates sort of at the fringes of the market. And I say that in the best possible way, at the fringes of the market, but it's not perceived as like normal or even necessarily desirable by the people who are responsible for regulating it. And I think, I'm not saying that there's any vendetta against raw milk cheese on the part of our regulators. I think they're just trying to do a good job. But I think when you pile all of these values on top of facts, sometimes the facts get distorted.
Have the kind of methods to detect these newer pathogens, have they changed as well? I mean, what other tests are happening like at the farm and elsewhere? And
sometimes those tests can tell us more than we really know how to interpret. One of the issues with STEC is that there's a lot of evidence that many of those strains are potentially pathogenic, but potentially not pathogenic either. We have this fixation on testing, and testing is unlikely to be the answer to our problem. And what we really need to do is refocus away from testing and towards prevention. That is going to be far, far more effective at actually preventing illness. I feel like we're at a very fragile moment, and we need to be very careful that in the pursuit of eliminating all risk, we could actually eliminate our cultural heritage and these delicious and flavorful foods and tiny businesses that are really doing good things for rural communities and our environment and the world, and that the public health risk versus the other risks that might be invisible that would be associated with the demise of this industry, those two things have to be weighed up and taken in context.
Because you're often in the middle of all of that, aren't you? You are one of the people who does connect the regulators and the producers. What's that relationship like?
I really don't think that the regulatory bodies within the UK consciously have set out to be unfair to raw milk cheese. I honestly don't believe that there's an agenda there at all. But I think it comes back to this idea of what's perceived as normative and what's perceived as risky being not normative, and a lack of understanding about actually the cost of turning on that pasteurizer. And so, in a world where people are influenced by their perceptions in ways that they probably aren't even aware of, I do feel that raw milk cheese is a little bit on the back foot because it's not something that everybody in the country eats every day. But again, from myself, and even within conversations within the industry, we've got to recognize that this is a real risk. And the more we're focused on how good is the evidence or whatever, in a way, it almost doesn't matter. What matters is that we recognize that there is a risk out there that everybody who's making cheese needs to be thinking about.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds.
Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month.
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Quality sleep is essential. That's why the Sleep Number Smart Bed is designed for your ever-evolving sleep needs. Need a bed that's firmer or softer on either side? Helps you sleep at a comfortable temperature? Sleep Number Smart Beds let you individualize your comfort so you sleep better together. J.D. Power ranks Sleep Number number 1 in customer satisfaction with mattresses purchased in-store. And now, during our lowest prices of the season, shop the Sleep Number Smart Bed starting at $999 for a limited time. Prices higher in Alaska and Hawaii. For J.D. Power 2023 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards. Only at a Sleep Number store or sleepnumber.com.
Bronwyn Percival, who's technical director at Neal's Yard. Raw milk cheese carries specific risk advice when it comes to food safety. The Food Standards Agency in England states that we advise that raw or unpasteurized milk and cream may contain harmful bacteria that can cause food poisoning. People with a weaker immune system are particularly vulnerable to food poisoning and should not consume it. We wanted to ask the FSA about this, but they couldn't talk to us because of the election. But they told us that typically meat is the top source of the around 1,500 cases of STEC infections per year, followed by dairy and then fruit and veg. That number compares to 55,000 cases a year of Campylobacter poisoning, mostly from undercooked meat. And that, Nina, puts our platter of food in a slightly different light. So what happens when food pathogens meet public health policy?
My name is Catherine Donnelly. I am a professor emeritus from the University of Vermont, and I'm a food microbiologist.
Well, we've been looking into a particular strain of E. coli, STEC 0145, and we understand this is fairly new, first recorded in the 1980s. What can you tell us about it, and did you study this at any point? I mean, where did it come from?
As food microbiologists, STECs were newly emerged organisms in the 1980s, like 1982. The first strain that created problems, E. coli 0157H7, we hadn't seen that strain before 1982. And so what was going on? And the emergence of STECs, the best scientific evidence indicates that there's a correlation to the use of antibiotics in animal feeds.
So when a small producer is caught up in an outbreak, it causes, huge financial and, losses and emotional strain. On the other hand, the public expect safe food. What's the answer?
Number one, foods aren't sterile. And if we look at by category, the leading cause of foodborne illness, again, according to the World Health Organization, the experience in my country and yours as well, produce. And so we're all consuming fresh fruits and vegetables because they're healthy foods. They turn out to be the leading cause of most foodborne illness. And so there's a paradox there, right? Many of us want minimally processed foods. Well, there's some level of risk there, as there is it just in life in general. And so what we try and do is engage in practices that minimize that risk. Again, we don't want them to be sterile products. And so there's always a chance of some unfortunate incident.
Some people feel, why don't we pasteurize all cheeses? An industrial food chain is bigger and has better protections.
Well, the reality is, again, I'll use the United States example. Many more outbreaks are traced to products produced in that industrialized food system, where you have intensive production confined to certain areas. In the case of leafy greens, the Salinas Valley in California grows most of the lettuce in the United States. And you see these outbreaks year after year after year from the Salinas Valley.
I mean, I've been a food journalist for long enough to have reported on the move in this country in the 1990s to try really and wipe out all raw milk cheeses. Because the feeling in the food safety agencies was that these are terribly risky and everybody would be better off if we just pasteurized everything.
And I got to see that up close and personal. I was asked by Food Standards Scotland to help them do a raw milk cheese risk assessment. And it was a real struggle to again, get all of this very well-documented scientific evidence into the risk assessment.
I mean, a lot of people just find this, this topic too sciencey, too technicky, and people are polarized into camps, particularly about the benefits and risks of live foods. I mean, is there a better way of talking about this? And would you say it's important that people engage with this?
I think it's absolutely important. And looking at the bigger picture, what's happening to our climate across the globe, the flooding events that are moving pathogens from places where they wouldn't normally move if there wasn't flooding. And so I think it's something everyone should be paying attention to. The other reality is from the consumer, from the host perspective, we're all living longer. Part of the reason we're living longer is medical interventions. And so chemotherapy for cancer treatment, you're shutting down your immune system. Suddenly you're susceptible to things that you wouldn't be if your immune system was functioning normally. So I wish we could get the public more engaged in science, because the more we know, the better we can protect ourselves, but it's also fun.
In your book, Ending the War on Artisan Cheese, you find that new rules proposed by the Food and Drug Administration in the US that would penalize raw milk cheese producers were not based on evidence, and you seem to have spotted that when no one else did.
When the EU decided to start protecting their named products like Parmigiano Reggiano, all the geographic indications, that was very threatening to U.S. industrial producers. And so if you ban the use of unpasteurized milk in cheese making, whoops, can't import PDO, Parmigiano Reggiano anymore. In 2014, let's ban the use of wooden boards in cheese aging came out of the blue. What the FDA was saying, well, cheesemakers should use, aging on stainless steel or, plastic boards instead because they're easily cleanable. And in my laboratory, we'd been doing some work on looking at Listeria's attachment to surfaces. Well, stainless steel, Listeria forms biofilms. It can attach to stainless steel. Same with plastic. That would have been a disaster. And so it was more of a political versus scientific exercise. I think when regulatory guidance makes no sense scientifically, everyone can get on board and saying, what's up with this? There's got to be something other than science going on here. And if we've done anything, maybe we've made our food supply too clean, the industrial foods. We're not challenging our immune system, and we've kind of done it to ourselves.
Professor Catherine Donnelly, one of the world's leading dairy microbiologists and the author of Ending the War on Artisan Cheese, amongst many other books. Because this whole program is about food that's safe and healthy, it seems time to hear something about the particular health benefits from some of these foods that are seen by some as higher risk. Here's microbiologist David Galley.
You've got this sort of understanding of how we need exposure to things. We need this variation in our diets. We absolutely need, we need to be eating more raw food. That builds the complexity in us, in our guts. But of course, with that comes a risk of exposure to some of these other pathogens. So it's the same with the food. I think it's great to eat this variation. Go out there, grab it, embrace it. But I suppose it just increases the risk. With certain things. It's like those that play Russian roulette with raw oysters. High risk, high reward.
Do you eat raw food?
Yes, I personally, I like the variation, and I suppose I'm willing to live with the very low risk that exists. And I think, our job is to come up with the hurdles that cheesemakers, for example, can use that really reduce the E. colis that are there. And so that we can have our cheese and eat it. There you go.
This has been a very complex story to follow, as there are so many ways that food safety concerns us. I mean, the survival of the quality food sector, where farming practices preserve biodiversity, both at an environmental level and at the level of gut health, which is connected to our total health. And the decisions taken around public health and cultural or political influences that surround that. There is the collaboration between cutting-edge scientists, the microbiologists, the geneticists, and applied scientists, i.e. farmers on farms. One thing that strikes me most, though, is the bigger question about food that is safe or food that doesn't make us sick. And when you look around now at the prevalence of non-communicable diseases, stroke, heart disease, diabetes type 2, which are increasingly linked to the consumption of industrialized food, ultra-processed food. Maybe we have to balance our notions of food safety. We have to say, of course, that has to be guarded against. Standards of production have to be really high. But we really are going to have to look at this very big issue. The numbers of people dying from diet-related diseases now is, just puts COVID in the shade.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question to raise because, food safety means food that is safe, means food that is good for us, doesn't make us sick. So under that umbrella, they should be considered in the same conversation, which is what we've kind of tried to do in this programme. Obviously, we're only able to touch on it in some ways, but, we have the right to expect that food that we eat won't make us sick. So I think that's what the food citizens were touching on. And in that light, the microbial food safety should at least be equal to or considered in the same light as other food that we eat. And because the health impacts of ultra-processed food are only just starting to be understood, the way that governments are able to regulate that or, willing to regulate that is totally untapped. Do you ever feel scared eating certain foods?
No, I don't. Well,
how do you deal with food safety in your day-to-day? What kind of decisions do you make?
If I'm cooking chicken, I'm really careful about putting the chicken when I'm preparing it on something I can wash and put in the dishwasher. And I wash my hands really carefully handling chicken because it's one of the likeliest sources of food poisoning.
Mm. Well, Campylobacter is the top foodborne illness in the UK.
Yeah.
And again, it can affect a range of products, obviously chicken, one of them.
What about you? What food safety precautions do you take?
Yeah, well, interestingly, since doing this programme, I have been thinking about it a little bit more. I think, generally speaking, washing your leafy greens before eating them is probably a good idea. And I no longer skimp on that. I did used to do that, but now I'm a little bit more interested. Meat, I think, is probably the only one where I would not eat it if it's past its use by date, sorry. But fruit and veg, no. Cheese, no. I don't really have any kind of worries about that. I don't abide by the best before dates particularly. I think, it sounds really boring, but good hand hygiene. The food producers themselves have put in so much effort around basic hygiene, and then when it leaves them, is totally out of their control. So I think kind of the least you can do is carry on that.
Just wash your hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a fair precaution to take. But other than that, no, I don't tend to worry too much about food. Obviously, we've all had food poisoning in the past, and it just shows, doesn't it? Sometimes things get through, and if you are healthy and fingers crossed able to fight the infection off, then you'll recover fairly quickly.
We're going to end with a line from the wonderful food citizens, ordinary people with ordinary expectations of food. But I think we ought to eat, we bought all this food. Let's take our life in our hands. Because talk me through, because you've looked up the linkage. Salad leaves.
It's not just, is this going to kill me? It also means, is it good for me? And because certain things will kill you in the long run. If it's ultra processed, eventually 10 years down the line you end up with diabetes. It's the food that killed you, so that's not safe. And so safe food to me encompasses all of that. Safe for the producers, safe for the environment, and safe for the end consumers too.
The food programme was presented by me, Sheila Dillon, and produced by Nina Pullman for BBC Audio in Bristol.
Welcome to The Bright Side, a new kind of daily podcast from Hello Sunshine, hosted by me, Danielle Robay.
And me, Simone Boyce. Every weekday, we're bringing you conversations about culture, the latest trends, inspiration, and so much more. We'll hear from celebrities, authors, experts, and listeners like you.
Bring a little optimism into your life with The Bright Side. Listen to The Bright Side from Hello Sunshine on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.